November 1878. Sweetwater County, Wyoming Territory. While most settlers were sealing cracks and stacking firewood for the coming freeze, something unusual was happening at the edge of the valley. A widow named Martha Henley was doing something that made no sense to anyone watching. She was building her chimney underground, not straight up through the roof like every other cabin for 100 miles. Down, horizontally, beneath the floorboards. Her neighbors thought she'd lost her mind. The local mason called it the dumbest waste of stone he'd ever seen. One man even offered to rebuild it properly, out of pity. But when that winter hit, when temperatures plunged to 40 below and men were burning through a month's worth of wood in 2 weeks, something impossible happened in Martha's cabin. Her floors stayed warm, not just tolerable, warm. While ice was forming on the inside walls of cabins across the valley, you could walk barefoot across Martha's floor in the middle of January. Today, you're going to understand what she figured out that the experts completely missed. And by the end of this video, you'll see why her crazy idea became the most copied building technique in 3 counties. If you want to see one frontier hack every week that actually worked when lives depended on it, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Let's go back to where this all started. Martha Henley wasn't trying to revolutionize anything. She was a seamstress, 42 years old, widowed 3 years earlier when her husband died clearing timber. She had 2 children, a daughter of 9 and a son barely 7, and a small claim near the Sweetwater River where the wind came down from the mountains like a knife. Her cabin was standard issue for the territory. Log construction, 16 by 20 feet, stone foundation, single room with a sleeping loft. And like every cabin out there, it had one unforgiving problem. The floor was freezing. Not cold, freezing. Ice would form between the floorboards by December. Her children would wake up with frost on their blankets where their breath had settled overnight. She'd burn half a cord of wood a week just to keep the main room survivable. And even then, the heat rose straight to the roof while the floor stayed bitter cold. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Her daughter had developed a cough that wouldn't break. The boy's feet were covered in chilblains. And Martha knew, the way every frontier mother knew, that another winter like the last one could kill them. So in the fall of 1878, she decided to rebuild her chimney. Not because she had some brilliant plan, because the original chimney was failing. The stonework had cracked over the summer. Smoke was leaking into the cabin. She had no choice. But here's where the accident happened. When she tore down the old chimney, she found the foundation stones had shifted. The base was sitting 8 inches off center from where the roof line needed the chimney to exit. To rebuild it straight up, she'd have to demolish part of the sleeping loft and relay the entire firebox. She didn't have the time. She didn't have the materials. Winter was 6 weeks out. So she did something that looked completely insane. She built the chimney horizontally first, running it beneath the cabin floor for 12 feet before angling it up through the roof at the far end. She lined the underground section with flat sandstone, creating a low tunnel about 10 inches tall and 14 inches wide. She insulated the channel from a floor joist with a 6-inch gap filled with dry sand and clay. Then she covered the whole thing, laid the floorboards back down, and ran the chimney up and out near the back wall. To anyone watching, it looked like a mess. A desperate, ugly fix. A woman trying to solve a problem she didn't understand. Her nearest neighbor, a carpenter named Dalton Fraser, stopped by while she was laying the stone channel. He stood there for a long time, just staring. "Ma'am," he finally said, "that's not how chimneys work." Martha didn't argue. She just kept laying stone. What Martha had built, accidentally, out of necessity, was a radiant floor heating system. She didn't call it that. She probably didn't even understand the full physics of what she'd done. But here's what was happening beneath her cabin floor. When she lit the fire in her firebox, the hot exhaust gases, somewhere between 400 and 600 degrees Fahrenheit, weren't going straight up and out into the sky like a normal chimney. They were traveling horizontally through that 12-foot stone channel first. And as those gases moved through the tunnel, the sandstone was absorbing the heat. Sandstone has high thermal mass, meaning it soaks up heat slowly and releases it even slower. Those stones were essentially becoming a battery, storing energy from the fire and radiating it upward through the floorboards for hours after the flames died down. Think of it like this. A normal chimney throws about 70% of your heat straight out the top. It's gone. Wasted. But Martha's system was capturing that waste heat, storing it in stone, and pushing it back into the living space from below. The sand and clay layer above the channel did two things. First, it prevented the wood joists from charring. Second, it diffused the heat evenly across the floor, so you didn't get hot spots directly above the tunnel. The whole system worked on a principle that modern engineers would recognize immediately: extended flue path for heat recovery. But to a frontier community in 1878, it looked like a disaster waiting to happen. The sandstone alone weighed close to 1,800 pounds. People said it would crush the foundation. Others worried the heat would ignite the floor joists, even with the sand barrier. A few thought the horizontal run would kill the draft and fill her cabin with smoke. Dalton Fraser told half the settlement that Martha was going to burn herself and her children alive. Another man, a stonemason named Horace Webb, who'd built chimneys for 20 years, called it a fool's trap and refused to even look at the design. But Martha had already committed. The stones were laid. The chimney was built. And winter was coming whether anyone believed in her plan or not. The ridicule started before the first snow. Women from the church group came by in late October, ostensibly to check on Martha and the children. But what they really wanted was to see this strange chimney everyone was talking about. They stood in her cabin, looked around, and one of them, a woman named Iris Coltrane, wife of the cattleman, said it plain. "Martha, honey, this doesn't look like a proper home." Another woman, younger, wouldn't even step fully inside. She stayed near the door and whispered to Iris, loud enough for Martha to hear, "Feels like standing in a root cellar." The men were worse. Dalton Fraser made it his personal mission to warn people. He'd stand outside the general store and tell anyone who'd listen that Martha Henley was courting disaster. "That woman's got hot smoke running on her dry wood," he'd say, shaking his head. "Come January, that cabin's going to go up like a haystack." Horace Webb, the stonemason, was more cutting. When someone asked him about Martha's setup, he didn't even pause. "Fire belongs above the ground, not beneath it. That's not engineering. That's desperation." Even the few people who were polite to Martha's face would turn around and smirk. She'd overhear them at the trading post, talking like she wasn't 10 feet away. "She's doing her best, poor thing. Widow with no man to set her straight. Won't last the winter." Martha didn't defend herself. She didn't explain the sand barrier or the thermal mass or the draft calculations she'd worked out by trial and error. She just kept splitting wood, kept her children close, and waited. Because she knew something they didn't. When she'd done a test burn in early October, before the weather turned, the floor above the stone channel had stayed warm to the touch for 6 hours after the fire went out. 6 hours. Her old chimney? The floor went cold within 30 minutes. So she didn't care what Dalton Fraser thought. She didn't care what Horace Webb said. She cared that her children's feet wouldn't freeze. She cared that she might, just might, make it through the winter without burning herself into poverty. And in mid-November, the weather gave her a chance to prove it. The winter of 1878 to 1879 in Wyoming Territory wasn't just cold. It was a killer. The first hard freeze came on November 18th. By November 22nd, the temperature had dropped to 18 below zero. By early December, it was hitting 30 below at night, and it stayed there for weeks. Men who'd been on the frontier for 20 years said they'd never seen anything like it. Livestock froze standing up. Water buckets turned solid in under an hour. And the wind, constant, cutting, merciless, made it feel even colder. Across Sweetwater County, families went into survival mode. Fireplaces ran day and night. Settlers were burning through 2, sometimes 3 cords of wood a month. People started sleeping in shifts to keep the fires going, because if the fire died, the cabin would drop below freezing in less than an hour. And even with fires roaring, the floors stayed ice cold. Families were stuffing straw under their blankets and wearing boots indoors just to keep from losing toes to frostbite. Dalton Fraser's cabin was burning a cord every 10 days. His wife wrapped the children's feet in wool and kept them off the floor entirely. Ice formed on the inside of their windows every single night. Horace Webb's place wasn't much better. He'd built his own chimney, of course, a textbook design, straight and proper. But his family was shivering just like everyone else. His daughter told her mother she could see her breath in bed. And then, in mid-December, something strange started to spread through the settlement. A rumor. Martha Henley's cabin was warm. At first, people didn't believe it. A neighbor woman named Ruth Calloway had stopped by to bring Martha some preserves, and when she stepped inside, she froze. Not from cold, from shock. The floor was warm. Not tolerable. Warm. Warm enough that Martha's children were walking around barefoot. Warm enough that Ruth actually bent down and put her hand on the floorboards to make sure she wasn't imagining it. "Ow?" Ruth asked. Martha just smiled. The chimney. Ruth went home and told her husband. He didn't believe her, so he walked over himself the next day, and sure enough, Martha's floor was radiating heat like a stovetop. He asked to see the firebox. It was burning slow and low, maybe a third of the wood Dalton Fraser was running through. And yet the cabin was warmer. Noticeably, measurably warmer. Word got around fast. And here's where you need to stay with me, because the numbers are about to blow your mind. By late December, people started comparing notes. Dalton Fraser's cabin, interior temperature around 42 degrees Fahrenheit at floor level, even with the fire roaring. He was burning 16 to 18 logs a day. His floor was cold enough to crack eggs on. Horace Webb's cabin, similar story. 40 to 45 degrees at the floor. Massive wood consumption. Constant fire management. Martha Henley's cabin, floor temperature average between 58 and 62 degrees Fahrenheit. And she was burning 8 to 10 logs a day, half of what her neighbors were using. But here's the kicker. When Martha let her fire die down at night, just coals, no active flame, her floor stayed above 50 degrees for 6 to 8 hours. People could walk on it comfortably in the middle of the night. The stone channel beneath the floorboards was acting like a radiator, releasing stored heat long after the fire had reduced to embers. Dalton Fraser's floor dropped to freezing within 90 minutes of the fire dying. The difference wasn't subtle. It was survival. By the end of January, Martha had burned through 1.5 cords of wood. Dalton Fraser had burned through 4. Horace Webb, nearly 5. And the social shift had already started. February 1879. Dalton Fraser stood in Martha Henley's cabin for the 3rd time that week. He wasn't there to mock anymore. He was there with a notebook, sketching the layout of her stone channel, measuring the distance from the firebox to the exit flue, asking questions about draft and airflow that he should have asked 6 months earlier. "How deep did you set the stones?" he asked. Martha told him. 12 inches below the joists. 6 inches of sand and clay as a buffer. Sandstone, not limestone, because it held heat longer. Dalton wrote it all down. He wasn't the only one. By mid-February, Martha's cabin had become an unofficial classroom. Men who'd called her foolish were now standing in her home, watching her feed the fire, feeling the warmth rising through the floorboards, doing the math in their heads. Horace Webb came by on a Saturday. He didn't apologize, but he didn't need to. He stood there for 20 minutes, silent, running his hand along the floor, inspecting the stonework where Martha had left a small access panel for cleaning. Finally, he looked up at her. "This isn't luck," he said. "This is engineering." Martha just nodded. Within 2 months, the shift was complete. Dalton Fraser rebuilt his chimney that spring. He didn't copy Martha's design exactly. His cabin was oriented differently, so he ran his stone channel in an L shape beneath 2 walls. But the principle was the same. Capture the heat. Store it. Radiate it back. A trapper named Samuel Driscoll, who lived 8 miles north, heard about the system and rode down to see it himself. He went home and built his own version using river rock instead of sandstone. It worked. Not quite as efficient, but still a massive improvement over his old setup. By the winter of 1879 to 1880, 11 cabins within a 30-mile radius had some form of underfloor heating channel. Some were simple, just a short horizontal run before the chimney went vertical. Others were more elaborate, with multiple channels running beneath different sections of the floor. A few families even started adding stone heat sinks near their fireboxes. Large blocks of sandstone or granite that would sit in the firebox around, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it at night. The technique didn't have a formal name. People just called it the Henley method or running the chimney low. But everyone knew where it came from, and the results were undeniable. Families who adopted the system reported the same things Martha had experienced: warmer floors, longer heat retention, significantly lower wood consumption. Some people estimated they were saving 30 to 40% on firewood over the course of a winter. In a place where wood meant survival, that wasn't just convenient. It was life-changing. By the mid-1880s, the design had spread into neighboring counties. Variations appeared in Montana, Dakota Territory, even parts of Colorado. Homesteaders adapted it to their local materials. Some used clay tiles, others used stacked fieldstone. A few even experimented with brick. The core idea, though, stayed the same: don't let the heat escape. Trap it, store it, use it. And it all came from a widow who didn't have the luxury of building things the proper way. Martha Henley never became famous. She didn't patent her design or write a manual. She just kept sewing, kept raising her children, and kept her cabin warm. But her influence spread quietly, cabin by cabin, winter by winter, until the crazy idea that people had mocked became the standard. Not because it was trendy, not because someone with authority endorsed it, because it worked. Here's the thing about frontier innovation: it didn't come from universities or engineering firms. It came from necessity, from people who couldn't afford to waste a single log, from mothers who couldn't let their children freeze, from individuals who had to solve problems with the materials they had, the knowledge they could gather, and the willingness to try something that looked impossible. Martha Henley's underfloor chimney wasn't a miracle. It was physics, thermal mass, heat retention, radiant transfer, principles that engineers today spend years studying in textbooks. But she figured it out with sandstone and sand and sheer determination. And when you look at modern radiant floor heating systems, the ones that cost thousands of dollars to install, the ones that run on electricity or hydronic loops, you're looking at the same concept Martha stumbled into in 1878. Capture the heat low, radiate it upward, let the floor become the heater. The frontier didn't reward tradition. It rewarded results. And that's the lesson here. Not that old methods are always better, but that dismissing someone's idea because it looks strange, because it breaks the rules, because it doesn't fit the conventional model, that's how you miss brilliance. Dalton Fraser learned that. Horace Webb learned that. An entire county learned that. Sometimes the person everyone's laughing at is the only one who actually understands the problem. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from, and what's the coldest winter you've ever faced? And if you want to see more forgotten techniques that actually worked when survival was on the line, hit that subscribe button. Every week, one story, one hack, one piece of frontier wisdom that still holds up today. I'll see you in the next one. Educational note: this video presents historically inspired reconstructions for educational and storytelling purposes. Characters, names, and specific events are fictional, while the techniques, concepts, and principles discussed are based on real historical practices and well-established physical or practical knowledge. Any modern application should be evaluated according to current standards, safety guidelines, and applicable laws or regulations. This content is educational in nature and does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.